Hi again, everybody, and welcome to this week's Ingles Furman Radio Network preview. Final 2 weeks of the regular season are upon us, and for Furman, the final 2 weeks of the 2024 campaign. Heading to ETSU to take on a Bucks team that is still hoping to grab a playoff spot when the FCS field is announced a week from this Sunday. I am Dan Scott, voice of the Paladins. Tom Van Hoy, David Cobb, and I will have all the action for you on the Fan Upstate, our flagship station, on Saturday. We'll tell you about the broadcast stuff coming up in just a minute. Furman, of course, dropping a tough decision to Wofford last time out, now 2-9 on the season, while the Bucks are looking for what would be a fifth conference win. They're 6-4 overall. They're 4-2 in the league, and they, as I said, are still holding out hope for a playoff spot. And we'll take a look at the standings and the rest of the SoCon schedule coming up in just a bit. When you look at this ETSU team, it is markedly different from what we have seen over the past couple of years. Trey Lamb, the new head coach, replacing George Quarles, and completely remaking the roster. Clay Hendricks telling me this week that Trey has done a good job at ETSU of taking advantage of the current rules as they are set up in the world of college football or college athletics in general. And when he came in from Gardner-Webb, he brought a number of those players with him, completely turned over their roster, and they have been a very, very good team this season, especially on the defensive side of the ball. It's really something of a paradox, if you want to call it that, because like Furman, offensively, ETSU is minus 10 in the turnover margin. They have turned it over 21 times. They've thrown 17 interceptions and lost 4 fumbles. But what has kept them in games, and for the most part, an ability to overcome that, is their defense, particularly their ability to get after the passer. They have 34 sacks on the season with 2 games remaining in the regular season. When you start looking at some of the numbers, they average 413, almost 414 yards of total offense, 193.5 on the ground, 220 through the air. Being told that we're probably going to see 2 quarterbacks play. Jalen King, who came in with Trey Lamb from Gardner-Webb, the sophomore, is the more dual threat guy. He is a guy who can make some plays with his feet, but he's also thrown 11 interceptions on the season. Geno English got the majority of the play and time for them in their game last week. He's a redshirt senior, came to Gardner-Webb from Florida State, and now with Trey Lamb at ETSU. So we don't know which one we're going to see start as of right now, but we do expect to see both of those quarterbacks. English is more of your prototypical pocket passer type of quarterback. They have a very talented receiving core. A.J. Johnson, who was at Gardner-Webb last year, who was an LSU commit, has had a very, very good season, 34 catches, over 550 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So they are going to try to get the big play on offense. As I said, though, they will turn it over. They have on the season 21 times, as we mentioned. But when you look at their defense, that's what's kept them in games, allowing just 21.7 points and only 317 yards of offense, 105 versus the rush, 212 versus the pass. Mentioned they have sacked opposing quarterbacks 34 times, and they are limiting opposing offenses to just a 29% conversion rate on third down. And when teams get in the red zone, they have been very stingy when it comes to allowing touchdowns. Of the 28 red zone opportunities opposing offenses have had, ETSU has only allowed 16 touchdowns. So those are some of the numbers that the Bucks will throw out there for the Paladins. It's been kind of strange in the sense that on one hand you look at the last 2 weeks versus VMI and Wofford, and when you take 4 quarters of football into consideration, they have played 4 quarters better than they have probably played at any time during the season, save for the early season game against Stetson, and yet they still come up with a pair of losses. It's been that kind of dynamic for Furman this year, with the injuries continuing to pile up and the young players who are, some of them being, for a lot of them, in fact, being forced to play when maybe they weren't ready to do so from a progression and development standpoint. But there are also those bright lights. And one of the things that I'll talk about with Dwayne Vaughn on our Pepsi Countdown to Kickoff when we get into the defensive portion of the Coordinator's Corner is the light going on for a couple of his young defensive linemen in Ty Cosserode and Caldwell Bussey, and how well those two youngsters are playing. A couple of freshmen moving in to starting roles. So you'll have that conversation. We'll talk some play calling philosophy with Justin Roper on the offensive side of things, and talk to Clay Hendricks. An interesting conversation with him in which, despite the season that they've had, 2-9, the ability to remain optimistic about this team moving forward. I think you're going to really enjoy all of those conversations this week. Let's look at the conference standings as we normally do on our Ingles Furman Radio Network preview. Mercer still leading the league at 6-1, 9-1 overall. You see Chattanooga behind them at 5-2, and then ETSU and Western Carolina both with 2 conference losses, and the Bucks with Furman and VMI, the last 2 remaining teams on their schedule, hoping that will translate into another pair of wins and they can finish with a 6-2 league record and see if that's enough at 8-4 overall to get them into the playoffs. Wofford at 3-4 after their win over the Paladins last week. Samford 2-3, the Citadel 2-5, and there's Furman at 1-4, VMI at 1-5. When you look at this week's schedule, you've got, of course, our game kicking off at noon. VMI at Western Carolina at 1 o'clock. Samford at Chattanooga 1:30. Citadel at Wofford at 1:30. And Mercer playing out of conference. I'll say they are at number 10, Alabama, a 2 p.m. kick there. As for the broadcast, we will be on the air from Johnson City. A little breakfast and football. 10:30 a.m., our Pepsi Countdown to Kickoff, and the kick at noon in Johnson City against ETSU. You can listen at 97.7 FM in Greenville and 97.1 in Spartanburg. That's the Fan Upstate. Odyssey.com and the Odyssey app. And, of course, we've got you covered on Boothcam as well on Facebook and on the artist formerly known as Twitter. We'll see if the Paladins can put together a good run in these last couple of weeks and maybe play spoiler for some teams that are looking for a playoff spot or, in Mercer's case, in a couple of weeks, playoff seeding. Who knows? We'll see what happens. I know you talk to this coaching staff, and they continue to say that they're working hard in practice. The attitude has stayed good, and that's 90% of the battle. It leads you to believe that when you turn the season on this page, that there's going to turn the page on this season, for those of you who speak English, you'll be able to look at this coming off season and ahead to 2025 with some confidence despite the record. We'll see how it plays out. We'll talk to you at 10:30 from Johnson City on Saturday with the Pepsi Countdown to Kickoff. Noon kick, Furman and ETSU. Until then, I'm Dan Scott saying God bless you. So long, everybody.